Yesterday, children, we studied the lesson Poets and Pancakes, and I shared my YouTube video with you. Today, let us continue in that connection. We had finished that Subbu was a talented person. He was a versatile genius, and he now let me tell you about Subbu in detail. What were his characteristics? So Subbu was a tailor made for films. Here was a man who could be inspired when commanded. Filmmaking must have been and was so easy with a man like Subbu around. He gave direction and definition to Gemini Studio during its golden years. Subbu had a separate identity as a poet, and though he was certainly capable of more complex and higher forms, he deliberately chose to address his poetry to the masses. He, his success to film overshadowed and dwarfed his literary achievements, or so his critics felt. Now, another aspect of Subbu's personality, he composed several truly original story poems in folk refrain and diction, wrote a sprawling novel, Tilana Monambal, with dozens of very deftly etched characters. He was an amazing actor. He never aspired to the lead roles, but whatever subsidiary roles he played in any of the film, he performed better than the supposed main player. He had a genuine love for anyone he came across, and his house was a permanent residence for dozens of near and far relations and acquaintances. It seemed against Subbu's nature to be even conscious that he was feeling and supporting so many of them. He was a charitable and improvident man. Now, children, let us see the clothing, about the clothing of the story department. Clothing of a lawyer or a legal advisor, and they wore pant and a tie, sometimes a coat that looked like a coat of mail. And in Gemini Studio, the writers and poets, including Subbu, wore khadi dhoti, oversized, clumsily tailored khadi shirt. Now, the lawyer was officially known as the legal advisor, but everybody referred to him as the opposite. Now, lawyer and the actress episode we come to. The extremely talented, temperamental actress blew over on the sets. Everyone was stunned, but the lawyer switched on recording equipment. When the actress paused, he said, "1 minute, please," and played back the recording. When she heard her voice through the sound equipment, she was struck dumb through. There was nothing indiscriminating, unmentionable foul in the actress' tirade. Now, the meaning of the tirade is a long, angry speech of criticism or accusation. Children, accusation means blame. She was a girl from the countryside, simple and not much experienced, but she was catapulted into a position of importance and sophistication. She never recovered from the terror of that day. That was the end of the brief and brilliant career. Now, let us come to the another episode, that is how lawyers stood out from others at Gemini Studio. Means to say how lawyers were different from others at Gemini Studio. Now, they were lawyer was a part of the story department. They were dressed differently than others in the department. As we have seen in the previous slide, pant and a tie, sometimes a coat. Looked alone and helpless, a man of cold logic in a crowd of dreamers, a neutral man in an assembly of Gandhilites and Khadilites. One day the boss closed down the story department, and this was perhaps the only instance in all human history where a lawyer lost his job because the poets were asked to go home. Khadi clad poets of Gemini Studios' notion about communism. Most of them wore khadi and worshipped Gandhi. Naturally, they were all averse to the term communism. A communist was a godless man. He had no filial or conjugal love. Children, yesterday I discussed with you some words, but here let me again clear. Conjugal means marital, marriage. He had no compunction about killing his own parents or his children. He was always out to cause and spread unrest and violence among innocent and ignorant people. This is another episode, Frank Bushman's Moral Rearmament Army. Let us go through some points. One example to show that Gemini Studio was influenced by the plays staged by MRA. In this exam also, the question occurs, what is MRA? Or write a note on MRA with reference to the chapter Poets and Pancakes. So some 2,000 strong people visited Madras in 1952. They presented two plays in a professional manner, Jotham Valley, The Forgotten Factor. Message of the plays was simple. First-rate set and costume means they were of good standard. And Madras and Tamil drama community were terribly impressed by scenes of sunrise and sunrise in the play Jotham Valley. Now, how were the play staged? Bare stage, white background curtain, and a tune played on the flute. For some years, almost all Tamil plays had such a scene. Gemini family of 600 saw the plays over and over again. Complete. Now we discussed one character that English poets also were there in the Gemini Studio. The English poets spoke and addressed a dazed and silent audience. The question is here, if you see, I'll come back. What caused the lack of communication between the Englishmen and the people at Gemini Studio? You can see in the slide. And why is the Englishman's visit referred to as unexplained mystery? This question is very important, unexplained mystery in the chapter Poets and Pancakes. Again, I repeat the question. Why is the Englishman's visit referred to as unexplained mystery? And the previous slide we have seen what is MRA, Moral Rearmament Army. So these two questions are very important. Let us further switch on to the lesson, the points we are discussing. The English poets spoke and addressed a dazed and silent audience. No one knew what he was talking about, and his accent defeated any attempt to understand what he was saying. The audience at the Gemini studio could not understand what an English poet was doing in a film studio, which makes Tamil films for the simplest sort of people. Their lives did not give them the possibility of cultivating a taste for the English poetry. The poet looked pretty baffled too, for he too must have felt the sheer incongruity of his talk about the thrills and trivials of an English poet. Now, how did the author discover who the English visitor to the studio was? The Hindu had published a tiny announcement in an insignificant corner of an unimportant page, a short story contest organized by the British periodical by the name The Encounter. Author wanted to get an idea of the periodical before he spent a considerable sum in postage sending a manuscript into England. There were copies of The Encounter lying about the various degrees of freshness, almost untouched by readers, in the British Council Library. The editor's name rang a bell in the author's heart. It was the poet who had visited the Gemini studio, and the name of the poet was Stephen Spender. Now, another this thing mentioning is the god that failed. The author brought a special low priced student edition of the book, and the name of the book was The God That Failed, in which six eminent, I hope all of you understand the meaning of the word eminent, means famous. EMINENT, eminent means famous. And one more eminent is there, IMMIENT, that is that which is likely to happen. So, eminent men of letters in 6 separate essays described the journey into communism and their dissolution return. When he saw the name of Stephen Spender among the authors, the reaction to Spender's visit to Gemini studio was no longer a mystery. The boss of the Gemini studio may not have much to do with the Spender's poetry, but not with his God that failed. Now, let us view this piece as an example of chatty rambling style. One thought leads to another, which is then dwelt upon at length. Let's have a glance at the important points in the lesson. Gemini studio, makeup department, we have discussed office boy, we have discussed about Ashok Mitran, who was the writer, and as I told you, he recounts his days spent at Gemini studio in his book, in his one of his most famous book, his years with boss. Then Kothamangalam Subbu, the office boy, legal advisor, means the lawyers, the poets and writers, communism and MRAs, and English poet is Stephen Spender. So thank you children for, I hope all the concept is clear, and this children, I also request you to go through the chapter. If you don't understand, you please can contact on my personal WhatsApp. Thank you children.